Hello and welcome to Exercise Physiology for Sport. I'm Professor Mark Baines with Concordia University in Irvine, and today we're going to be talking about energy systems in training and hormonal response to exercise. Talking first and foremost about some concepts we have covered previously or recently. Talking about intensity versus work and rest ratios. First of all, when we refer to intensity, we can refer to intensity in terms of heart rate. We can be referring to intensity in terms of RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. We can be referring to intensity in terms of VO2 max, or we can be referring to intensity in terms of maximal force output. So when we say high intensity versus low intensity versus whatever intensity, we can be very clear about what we're specifically referring to. We got to make sure we do understand the difference between force output and effort. You could be perceiving yourself to be pursuing a very high level of effort, but your actual output may not be that high. What we really want, if we're pursuing, speed work, power work, basically strength work, we want to be high intensity output, not so much just high intensity effort. Even better, perfect world, this is really important. Effort would be minimal and output would be high. That is the primary goal. That's what we get when we get a really high functioning type athlete. The person doesn't look all that tired, heart rate's not getting that high, they're looking at their effort levels pretty light, and yet they're faster than anybody else, more powerful, stronger than everybody else is. Now, theoretically, if they push to their maximal, then it's outrageous how high they perform, but we must not confuse effort and output, okay? And we're referring to specifically intensity. When I'm referring to intensity, we're talking about in class. My expectation is when we say high intensity, we're not generally speaking talking about just effort, actually talking about output. But it's very important you clarify that, and I will always ask you to clarify that. Are you talking about effort, output, VO2 max, RPE, maximal force output, heart rate? What are you talking about? We have to really be careful about, and we'll talk about this in successive weeks, getting the heart rate up has nothing to do with output. I can't make it any more clear than that. Your heart rate could be really high and output could be really, really low. If that's true, then the purpose of pursuing a high heart rate is pointless. Can't make that any more clear than that. Where the goal is never to get the heart rate up. The goal is always to increase the force output. If it so happens that heart rate goes up too, okay, as long as they can proceed to a high level output consistently. If heart rate goes up, doesn't really matter, as long as output's always right up there, way up there. High efficiency and high output. We should always say that. Efficiency must be high, meaning form, technique must be there. Otherwise, output's going to drop. If they're losing form and technique, output will drop. Okay. So, generally speaking, we talk about high intensity or anaerobic type work. 1 to about 10 seconds-ish, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. 1 to 5 seconds, we should say, somewhere in that range is what ATP, adenosine triphosphate, how long it lasts in the cell. So we're talking about that 95+% max output, 98, 99, 100% max force output. It's going to be 5 seconds or less. That's why the 40-yard dash is often used as a primary maximal speed test. That's why the vertical jump, basically 1 to 3 jumps, is basically perceived to be the maximal force output, because it is actually very, very short. Something extremely short for maximal output, 1 rep max, right? That said, anaerobic work in general can go on longer than a few seconds. And depending upon the person's capacity, they can perform high level at those different durations of time. But we refer to high intensity, generally speaking, about 1 to 30 seconds, give or take. It would be very fair to say anaerobic power is often cited as being 1 to 10 seconds. The pursuit of maximal power, 10 seconds or less is probably a very wise idea. 11 seconds is not going to not bring you power, but that's a good number. Okay, a good general number. That said, 1 to 30 seconds, we're kind of going from ATP for the first few seconds to creatine phosphate to about 10 seconds, 15 seconds-ish, sometimes a little more than 15 seconds. Some sources basically refer to as much as up to 30 seconds. Although it's more commonly thought of as 10 to 15 seconds for creatine phosphate, somewhere in there, where it ceases to become the primary energy system as you're proceeding high-level effort while trying to get high-level output. And then you start going into glycolysis, somewhere in that 15, 20 seconds-ish range, somewhere in there. But that's still all anaerobic work. And if you want to get maximal effort anywhere in that 30 seconds or less, and you want to be able to proceed to basically 100% maximal output as well, minimal rest is 90 seconds, and probably more like 3 to 5 minutes for that maximal anaerobic power, 1 to 10 seconds. It's very important you understand that. RPE, honestly, I'm going to say this real callously, who cares? If your RPE is 5 and you're giving me the highest output I've ever seen from you, then that's what I want. I don't care what your RPE is. However, if your output is low, and your RPE is high. That's an indicator of fatigue, an indicator of possible hormonal problems, short-term or long-term. Maybe it's just because they're worn out, or something else going on, or some underlying long-term issue if it's been going on for quite some time. If it's chronic, it's a chronic-related issue if it's been going on for 6 months or more. We got some serious problems we got to take a look at medically. If that's someone saying that they can't get the same level of output as they were for now several months going on, and they don't feel particularly good, that's an indicator of something much more serious. Okay. That said, moderately high intensity, we often refer to work as about 30 seconds work period, about 2 minutes work period. It's still predominantly anaerobic. It starts moving a little bit more toward the aerobic energy system of output, but honestly, up to about 2 minutes, at least, you're still predominantly anaerobic for most individuals. Maybe as high as 3 minutes for some individuals, where you're still mostly anaerobic. Unfortunately, I'm seeing far too many sources citing that you're somehow 60% aerobic at only 2 minutes of work, and there's nothing really that actually supports that. You're probably at the minimum about 65 to 70%, 65% anaerobic, about 35% aerobic for a high-level athlete at around 2 minutes of work. Okay. That said, you're looking at probably no more than 90 seconds rest, because you shouldn't need that much if you're going to efforts that are 30 seconds to about 120 seconds long. Despite your maximal effort, your maximal output is not going to be higher than 90%, probably closer to maybe 85, 90%. And as long as you get closer to about 2 minutes, you're probably getting close to about 75, probably 80, 85% maximal force output. It's probably fair, 80, 85%, somewhere in there for 2 minutes of work. Okay. If you're going down as low as 70, 75% of your maximal force output when you're actually proceeding to work that's 2 minutes long, I think conditioning is your greater issue, because you should be able to actually proceed to a higher level output in work that's only 2 minutes long. Okay, but 30 to 90 seconds rest is fair. If you cannot get 90 seconds rest, you cannot proceed to the next set at the same level of speed or same level of force output for that same work period. Then rest period is not long enough because the person's getting fatigued. They're not ready to keep doing this. We should probably just call it right there. They got to be able to recover in 90 seconds or less. It's really important for a lot of our high intensity intervals, okay, and our generally high anaerobic type work. Now, moderately low intensity, still fairly anaerobic, but more toward aerobic as we get closer and closer to that 3 minute time frame. Starting somewhere around 2 minutes, as we said, where it's probably 35, 40%, maybe slightly more aerobic and mostly anaerobic. Get closer to 3 minutes. You could be as high as, for some individuals, closer to 60% or more toward the aerobic, depending on the individual. And that said, however, because it's 60% plus aerobic, you shouldn't take more than about a minute's rest. If you need more than a minute's rest, guess what? It's a lot more aerobic than you think, because again, we're confusing the maximal effort versus maximal output. And many of you in your citations are often referring to aerobic-like work for several minutes at a time with rest periods that are several minutes in length. And that just doesn't make any logical sense for aerobic level work. It's not aerobic level work if that's the case. That means the person was giving you maximal effort, probably 9, 10 RPE for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes. And if they get blasted like a competition, you can't expect them to come back, even with a few minutes rest, to come back and repeat that same level of performance. They're not going to be able to do it. You just don't do that. If you're going to ask for someone to perform work, this is really important, for 2 or 3 minutes-ish or longer, you have to expect the actual maximal force output is not going to be higher than, definitely not higher than 80%, could be closer to the 70%-ish range for some people, okay, of their maximal force output or maximal speed. And your rest period shouldn't be more than a minute, okay, if you're going to actually maintain the conditioning that we're looking for from an aerobic standpoint, okay? Shouldn't need it. So we're not looking for any more than about 70% of RPE, of ATP replenishment for the cell, maybe 70-75% of ATP replenishment, which should come in definitely 30 to 60 seconds. Okay, and lastly, really low intensity aerobic work whereby 3 minutes work and beyond, or certainly 4 or 5 minutes and beyond, 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, you name it. If they need more than 30 seconds rest, then their actual effort is actually quite high, and they're actually more anaerobic than you think. Consequently, if they're going to fatigue so much, you're losing the benefit of practicing at these levels. This is really important you understand the general ideas here. Don't confuse effort and output, and be clear about why the rest is what it's supposed to be. And that's straight physiology. The difficulty in actually looking at articles that someone has written that isn't actually from physiology textbook, or who hasn't actually done studies specifically and actually referring to specifically to glycolysis versus aerobic oxidation versus ATP-CP. They'll say things like, it's high intensity here, or it's low intensity here. And my first expectation is, what are you talking about? Effort or output? And I want you to tell me about VO2 max versus heart rate, force output, and RPE, all those things. We got to clarify those things to be clear about what we're trying to accomplish, and we have to actually understand science well enough to know what we're really getting out of given work period and rest period. Okay, and we'll repeat this again in successive weeks in case it's a little bit confusing to you, but you might have to repeat going over this quite a few times or reading about it more often than maybe you already have. That said, whatever you do, if you want to get improvement, you want to see an improvement in metabolism, which is the sum total of all chemical and physiological processes that convert food into energy. It's a lot. That's your metabolism, okay? If you want to increase metabolism and you want to return efficiently toward homeostasis, you have to find the correct work-rest ratios, whereby you'll be seeing better technique, which has to do with better nervous system, muscular control, probably better hormonal balance, able to recover from what the stress has been, which means you're within the gain of the system, so homeostasis is actually more easily attained. But if you start seeing a decrease in performance, what you're seeing is an inability to return toward homeostasis, an inability to return back to a level that can be sustainable to perform at this level, which is not the goal. It's never the goal of exercise. If your goal is to punish people, which some coaches do, I hope you don't, but that is a choice you will make. That's something different. If you actually want your athletes to get stronger, faster, more endurance, more power, any of the above, you want them to have the same result each set or improve upon each set, not falter and get lesser. Otherwise, you're training into poor performance, training into fatigue, training into hormonal fatigue, training into nervous system fatigue, and we can go on and on and on and on. Disrupting homeostasis to a greater extent, requiring more rest when you don't need to be doing that. Stop an extra set earlier. Don't push that extra last set. I heard one Greek coach one time say, and I've heard many coaches say it since, I can't remember who said it first, but every coach that I have talked to that's actually spent considerable time working with athletes that actually cares about the well-being of the athlete and has helped them get high-level performance always says a similar thing. The last set's your best set. The last rep's your best rep. Okay? As you finish, you're at your best. You're not faltering at your last moment of exertion. Okay? It's very important to get that. We don't want to disturb homeostasis anything beyond the gain of the system's capability to return efficiently back toward homeostasis. And that means a give and take, a little bit trial and error to some extent, but within the guidelines of what physiology already gives us. Not looking at what some random person has said. If a coach says it and you like the coach, that's great. Go and get some citations to support that information, not just what some coach has done before you. Don't repeat stuff that's been repeated to us just because we like the person who did it. Okay. That said, going into our concepts for this coming week, exercise can be eustress or distress, as we've kind of mentioned before. Eustress, meaning you get a positive response. You're going to get stronger. You're going to get faster. You're going to get more powerful. You're going to have an easier time to recover from shorter rest periods. Positive things happen from the stress you underwent. Okay. You'll see some minor stressor increases just by warming up properly as you warm into a given training session. You'll see the person getting better and better over the course of a training session. That's ideal. That's what should be happening. Near the end of that training session, you're peaking, and then you stop before you start to falter, and you cool down. That's ideally how it would generally look. That said, to see improved performance over time, the benefits of what you do now to actually really get significant benefit from hypertrophy, meaning actual muscle change, you're not going to see benefits in actual strength, in actual force put from bigger muscles or more powerful muscles for 6 weeks or more. Okay? You're not going to see the adaptation from them for at least several weeks. Some would argue maybe 4 weeks, but certainly 6 weeks is probably more fair, maybe even 8 weeks. Now, what you're really seeing then is, over that 4 to 6 week time frame, from whatever you're doing now and what benefits you see in improving performance, and however you see performance improving in your sport, over a 4 to 6 week time frame, what you're seeing is more neural responses, better communication between the nervous system and the muscular system and the skeletal system. That's what you're seeing. 4 to 6 weeks improvements from what you were doing 4 to 6 weeks ago, that's more neuromuscular. okay, hormonal. But actual structural changes, meaning bone size, well, that's much longer than 6 weeks. But muscle size increases, several weeks. Okay, make sure you understand the differences there. Distress, well, if you're getting lesser performance, something's wrong in your programming. The intensity is probably either too high or you're pursuing too many sets. So the duration of work over as a whole is wrong. Maybe the set periods are too long. Maybe the rest periods are too short. You need to adapt either the intensity, the work, or the rest in some capacity. Maybe it's the drill itself. It's too complex. Many times, many of you have said you want to add more complexity or more challenge to an exercise. Only when they're ready. If they've already shown the capacity to handle a lower stress, we consider a higher stress. We never start with the highest stress we can think of. We start with, what have you been able to do? Let's take it one step farther than that in terms of distance or speed or whatnot, right? Or one step further figuratively from what you've been doing. But don't take 10 steps forward or even 2 or 3. One step forward. Any improvement is an amazing thing. Okay? It's important we understand that. Metabolism, as we said before, is the sum total of all the chemical and physiological processes that go into converting food into energy. A higher metabolism means a person's going to be able to take in higher levels of food and burn through it easier to make better use of it for energy, for muscular energy and whatnot. And general adaptation syndrome says that if you give the body too much stress, you're going to have a decline in metabolism, a decline in performance. If you give the right level of stress, the right frequency of it, the right duration of it, the right intensity of it, in a gradual manner, you will see gradual improvements that won't occur over like really fast, but you'll see small improvements all the time. That's what you're looking for. It's a pretty impressive thing when you start to see some really small changes occurring with almost every successive contact you have with your athletes. Certainly on a weekly or every few weeks basis, you should see small changes in improvement in performance. If not, something is wrong in the way we're designing things, whether that be the work or the rest. Okay, endocrine efficiency or expression of our endocrine system and our hormone response. Hormones basically help regulate functions within our body, right? It's stuff we don't see, we'll never see. And unless we get a blood test, you probably wouldn't know specifically where your hormones were responding to what level, if they were within the proper level and whatnot. To help our bodies express appropriately, help them improve the expression of the endocrine system, and be able to get better hormonal response, more efficient hormonal response, we have to start gradually into a stress and gradually build into it, not go for the high intensity stuff too soon. And with that, talking about adrenaline or epinephrine, secreted by the adrenal gland, and during times of high stress, your body secretes adrenaline. We can never really fully duplicate, no matter how hard we try. And many of you talked about game speed or practicing like a game before you actually have the game. You'll never, this is really important, you won't be able to get 100% game recognition in a practice. Because once you know it's a game, it's a psychological difference. And unless you can somehow convince someone psychologically this is actually a game, a competition, for something that matters, not just a practice, you'll never get quite the same intensity. You know, we have some athletes, it seems like they practice really hard. That's great. But a lot of our athletes don't seem to really practice hard enough. You want them to practice like it's like a game. There's only so much you can get. If you can get even near game conditioning in actual practice, you're doing well with your athletes, if you can actually get that. You can't dip into that well too often. I've said this to many of you so far. You cannot expect high-level output for very long. So first of all, you can't expect a maximal force speed for more than about roughly 10 seconds, and the rest period's got to be 3 to 5 minutes. Otherwise, what you're going to see if you keep going longer than 10 seconds is a decline in force production. Hey, you can't help that. In a sport that's going longer than 10 seconds, you're going to see a decline. Often people talk about football. It's if it's a adenosine triphosphate, creatine phosphate power sport. Well, you're right to a point. But if you have an athlete who engages in a play for a few seconds and the rest is only for 30 seconds or less, or 45 seconds or less, and they go through 5, 10, 15, 20 straight sets, whether they're on the field for a long time, you see it all the time. Defenses tire. It's not that they're completely fatigued aerobically, it's they cannot perform at the same level of anaerobic performance. When you successively go through longer amounts of time, even if they're short sets, it doesn't matter. Your rest period's not long enough to recover back to 100% again. You can't get 100% ATP in 45 seconds. Most you're going to get 70-75%. So your next set is going to be lesser. So what you find athletes often doing in those situations is they conserve. They don't run back on defense. or they don't, you're not going to see anybody. You're just not going to see anybody become the player that is going to be able to stop, unless there's a better player. But if they're assuming the same level of conditioning or same level of ability between 10 players on a court, or 22 players on a football field, or 12 players on a volleyball court, or whatever, okay, you're not going to see one person always be the one. Because you can't. You can't proceed that 100% level effort no matter who you are. Your effort could be better than everybody else's from a standpoint of your maximal capacity higher than everybody else's, but you can't have your own 100% effort all the time. 100% output, excuse me, all the time. Can't do it, okay? Adrenal glands will get tapped, and what you'll find is they'll go to the well, they'll try to get that burst, and it's not there. It's going to take at least a couple, 2, 3, 4 days for complete adrenal return after really high-level output, especially when that high-level output or effort has been tapped for longer periods of time, as opposed to just a couple short little bursts or speeds or sprints, or speed runs or sprints. Okay. Insulin and glucagon. Insulin is an often maligned hormone, as if somehow a lot of insulin is a bad thing. I just don't understand it. I really don't. It's been said that way in the media. It's misunderstood largely. If you've taken a lot of carbohydrate, your body will secrete a lot of insulin. By itself, that means nothing other than what we just said. You took a lot of carbohydrate, your body secretes a lot of insulin to break down the carbohydrate. Now, as long as that person is taking a lot of carbohydrate and thereby requiring a lot of insulin, or a lot of high glycemic index carbohydrates requiring a lot of insulin to be able to break it down and utilize it right now, as long as they're going to be engaging in significant activity over the course of that given day, or within a couple hours of taking in that significant amount of carbohydrate. A lot of you referred to fasted cardio. You got to stop that. You got to stop it. Okay, it's often said that way, and don't confuse having digested fully your meal, which is important, crucial, with not eating anything prior to working out. I don't care who you are, you cannot proceed to that 75, 80+% maximal force output, glycolytic wise, if you don't eat before working out. People oftentimes work out first thing in the morning. They train first thing in the morning because it's all they got. Totally understand that. And it's 6 a.m. for a workout, and you can't get up and eat at 3 or 4, which would be ideal, by the way. Okay, you can't do it. It's like it doesn't work into their life. Get it? I understand completely. We should all understand that completely. However, don't expect your actual performance to be 80% or higher of your maximal capacity. Expect low level to moderate level aerobic type output. As long as you're okay with that, you're fine. But you're not going to be able to handle high intensity intervals, speed work, any of that kind of stuff. You can be running fast. If you actually time yourself, I guarantee you'll lose a few steps. You will. You're just not going to be the same when you're not eating enough food to support you, specifically carbohydrate in this case. Don't confuse secreting a lot of insulin with being a bad thing. People who don't exert themselves, don't exercise, and eat a lot of not just carbohydrates, but high glycemic index carbohydrates and poor choice carbohydrates and too many carbohydrates, and yet they never engage in glycolytic type activity, yeah, they can cause themselves problems over time. There's no question about it. But by itself, it's just a hormone that's secreted by the pancreas to actually break down carbohydrate and use it for later. It's very important you understand your body can only break down and utilize complex carbohydrates, low glycemic index carbohydrates, and store them as glycogen in the muscles and the liver. It cannot take in sugar, a monosaccharide, and then store it later as glycogen for muscles and liver. It doesn't work like that. Okay, it will break it down and utilize it. It cannot take in sugar and store it for later. That's why a lot of people have problems with taking a lot of sugar, wondering why they don't have stored glycogen. You can't. Okay, it's going to be used right now, or it's going to cause other hormonal problems and ultimately limit. Every time you secrete insulin, you limit glucagon. Okay, so people who regularly eat too many carbohydrates and the wrong choices limit glucagon, which breaks down fat and increases and it helps with fat metabolism. And that's why that's a bad thing if someone eats poorly and doesn't engage in regular exercise. But glucagon has a normal function of fat metabolism, and assuming you eat the right carbohydrates, the right timing, and you engage in the right activity, which is difficult, there's a question about it, but if you're doing those things, carbs not a problem at all. You can increase tremendous amounts of carbs if you're also increasing tremendous amounts of activity, right? And glucagon will not be inhibited because you will be engaging such activity. Your insulin levels will drop down significantly engaging in higher intensity type activities, and your glucagon will actually function normally during normal times, okay? But yeah, you won't actually metabolize fat significantly during high intensity. No, only low intensity. or lower intensity. Generally speaking, I'm probably looking at 70% or lesser of maximal force output, probably more like 60%. And make sure you understand too, going back on that, that even at lower level exertion, aerobic level oxidation level work, we're talking about work periods of 2 or 3 minutes or longer. Output's probably on the highest, 75, 80%, closer to that 2 to 3 minutes. As you go longer and longer and longer, it's going to drop down towards 70%, 65%, 60% max force output, and so on and so forth, all depending on the athlete, all depending on their conditioning and their capabilities, but it's going to keep dropping, right? But no matter what you do, when you're engaging in low-level activity, you're still never engaging more than 55% of your nutrients coming from fat and about 45% from carbohydrate. You don't want to be using protein as your breakdown for energy, ever. Okay, protein's job is for cellular growth, cellular development, cellular repair. Last thing we want to do is protein for energy. Protein has got to do its own job. It's got other things to do. Okay. Cortisol, often referred to as like the stress hormone, whereby the more stress you have in general, the more cortisol is secreted. So when you engage in more stressful activity, you get stressed out because you're bothered by something, not just physical activity, any kind of thing going on internally. Okay, cortisol will be secreted from the adrenal gland via the anterior pituitary. Okay, and adrenocorticotropic hormone. Basically, we're talking about a hormone that's meant to help you with stress. It's trying to do its best. The problem is when people engage in significant stress and don't allow their body to come down appropriately through, if they're doing just stressful activities in life, we're talking about they breathe more appropriately, they try to rest, they try to focus, they get some good food, they get some sleep, those things that support their body against stress, right? Because only so much you can do with stress when it's happening. You want to help your body respond to it when it does occur. And then otherwise, for high-level stress of exercise, well, we have to have the right rest between sets, which means, typically speaking, for maximal high-intensity stuff at 95, 100%, got to do that 3 to 5 minutes rest. For that 85, 90, 95% max force output, somewhere in there, now we're talking about 30 to 90 seconds rest. 30 is a little low for 80, but maybe around 80, 85% max force output. Probably more likely at 60, 90 seconds rest, okay, between sets. But you still got to rest between days, don't you? We can't forget about that. Maybe 1 or 2 days, maybe 3 days for some people before they engage in the same level activity again. Okay. Testosterone and estrogen, the sex hormones, and they're they come from the testes and from the ovaries, but they're aided by secretion of luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary. And testosterone and estrogen give us our masculine and our feminine sexual characteristics. Testosterone, if you don't have a lot of it, there's no way on earth you're going to be able to produce maximal power, maximal speed, maximal strength. Can't be done. Anybody who's maximally strong, fast, or powerful has a lot of testosterone. Now, don't confuse large muscles with someone who has the most testosterone, because you can be a smaller person and have more testosterone, but it probably means you're going to actually be able to have maximal capacities that are higher in terms of strength and power and speed. Mass is not everything. But yes, anybody who has a significant amount of muscle mass also has a significant amount of testosterone. Okay. IGF, or insulin growth factor, secreted by aided by growth hormone, which is secreted by the anterior pituitary, also occurs like testosterone somewhere in that 75-80% maximal force output range. Okay, work periods are generally speaking somewhere in that 45-60 seconds and less work periods, with sufficient rest between. Otherwise, you're just going to damage these hormonal responses, not help them. You've got to get the proper rest, not just the work. As I've said to you many times before, I'm going to say to you many times in the future, is the rest is where the benefits come, not the work. You have to be able to recover from the work, or it doesn't matter what you did. Doesn't matter. Okay? Recovery, I don't want to say it's everything, because the work matters clearly, but without the recovery, the work just ceases to be beneficial to us. Okay, but insulin growth factor, it kind of works fairly in conjunction along with testosterone in aiding us for muscle mass and growth, and of course aiding us with a more powerful and more challenging, higher intensity type activities. But we have to make sure that we allow it to recover by giving ourselves sufficient time between tapping into the well for those hormones to be maximized, which really means a minimum probably 2 days, as many as 3 or 4 days between significant level stressors at these levels, whereby we're challenging these hormones to be secreted at higher levels, that 75, 80, 85% or higher max force output. Okay. Thyroxine secreted by the thyroid. It regulates tremendously towards energy demands from the standpoint of you'll have significant fatigue if your thyroxine, or your thyroid gland, we should say more specifically, is not functioning properly. And that's not something you're going to know offhand. It's something that's going to be probably occurring over time, but that hormonal balance can very much be thrown off, typically speaking, by the obvious things we keep mentioning: work periods either too intense, and or rest periods too short, and or maybe the overall work period length is too long. And of course, we've all probably at some point done the trifecta of stupidity, which is one of the reasons why I got to the point where I had chronic fatigue syndrome, whereby it never really fully leaves you, by the way, which is another story altogether. But from absolutely trying to proceed through high levels of effort that were probably too high to expect for the same set after set after set after set, with short rest, okay, and for long durations of overall time. You can't do that trifecta of stupidity and expect positive responses. You'll beat the heck out of yourself. Your body's really great. It'll do its best to keep up with you, but ultimately you're meeting long-term fatigue, possible short-term illness, maybe long-term illness, and other chronic-related problems, certainly hormonally short-term and long-term, and who knows, maybe you'll never have the same level of performance again when you tap into that well too often. Be careful. Inflammation and immunity. Inflammation is a very normal response. Whenever your body undergoes stress, inflammation occurs. That's not a bad thing. People often talk about, I'm on an anti-inflammatory diet. Okay. You mean you're trying not to eat foods that cause unnecessary inflammation. But inflammation by itself is not a bad thing. It's a very normal thing. It's what you get when you're all, quote, swole after a hypertrophy workout, or when your legs are just bloated, when the blood is all rushed down to the area, the venous pooling after really fast running or a lot of it lactate threshold type challenging type efforts. You'll get that. It's inflammation, short term, should be short term. The key is, can your body recover from that and reduce inflammation quickly? If it can, we're fine. If it can't, we've got some major problems leading to chronic-related health issues down the road. And that's the concern. Inflammation is not the problem. How long the inflammation is maintained, the severity or intensity of the inflammation in the short term for someone who's not experienced such inflammation through stress in recent days and months, that's too much. It's going to challenge immunity in a very negative way. And the white blood cells are going to be become hyperactive and consequently doing more work such to the point where they're basically cannibalizing muscle tissue, and they're actually causing more hormonal imbalances and basically wreaking havoc internally. Not a good thing. The immune system kind of goes into overdrive when you get too much inflammation. It starts getting to the point where it's used to working at a really high level and starts attacking heavily in situations where it's not needed because it's so used to such high inflammation. And it becomes very, very difficult to balance the system whereby we can actually return to homeostasis and actually be able to get the benefit from stress without overstressing ourselves. It's a big challenge, and it creates a lot of issues, and a lot of collegiate athletes don't understand that, and a lot of even just out of college athletes, like many of you are, don't understand that stuff yet. You'll pay for it 10, 15 years down the road. A lot of people are fond of saying that, well, you know, sports kind of took their toll on me. No, no, no. Sports didn't take their toll on you. The way you trained in sports took their toll on you. It shouldn't be like that. There are plenty of athletes that don't have that issue, but the ones who actually pushed the pedal to the metal too often, too hard, they maybe experienced some good success, and more power to them for doing it. But there's ways we can do this without tapping the person to the point where their life as they know it, and years, months, days, or even days really, but years to come is worse because of what we do now. We don't want that to be the case. Final thoughts. Keep improving. Impress you, not me. If you're going to read your post, and that's impressive, and other people are saying how impressive it is, I'm probably going to be saying similar things, but you really need to make sure you're supporting everything you say. I'm always going to get back at you with, give me percentages or give me recognition of force output, duration, intensity of for VO2 max, heart rate, RPE, basically how long is your rest. Be more specific about how you think this is going to be helping endurance. Be more specific how this can help you return to homeostasis. Be as specific as you possibly can within the time frame you really have to put into this. And if you don't, I'm going to ask you questions and give you a chance, of course, but the better you can break that down, the less questions I'm going to ask of you. Okay. That said, we got an exam in a couple weeks. This is week 3 now, coming into week 3. Technically, just over a week for the next exam here, for the first exam. It'll be a 100-question exam. It'll be a 2-hour exam, multiple choice, okay? But if you haven't read through the material and watched these weekly videos and looked at the regular sample posts, big mistake not to read my sample posts for you. I don't just put that data in there just because, like, hey, here's a good essay. No, that data is important, not just for your understanding the material to apply in many years to come, which yes, it is, but also for your exam, also preparing you in general for each successive chapter so everything becomes much easier to understand and comprehend and evaluate, okay? Your paper's in 3 weeks. we'll do in 3 weeks. Technically, it's into week 5. We're in week 3. I'm going to put more information on that on Monday in the course announcements, more specifically about being careful about certain titles and where you put things. Like, don't say, I'm going to talk about metabolism and exercise. There's no way on earth you can only give a few pages of metabolism and exercise. You're going to be way too general, in which case I'm going to get after you because it's way too general. You'll be lucky to get a B on the paper, okay? Or you'll try to be specific and you'll realize you're running out of space because you can't possibly get enough words, enough time into something that's so in-depth. It's going to take like a 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 page paper or more. Okay, maybe something more like metabolic efficiency for the wrestler through glycolytic conditioning. Now we're getting somewhere. Be as specific as possible. I had someone last course talk about a specific diet for a specific athlete. Like, it was a little bit. They spent too much time trying to talk about why the diet wasn't good, as opposed to talking about what diet would be more ideal. Make sure you're not trying to go to actually disprove something. Talk about we're trying to get data to be able to help you get more clarity. Maybe it's in an area of particular interest for you. It has to be something we talk about in class. It has to be something very specific that you can cover adequately in a few pages. Not something that's way too general that you can't cover in that time frame, or it's going to hurt you both in terms of your grade and your benefit from the paper in the first place. Okay. Always ask me if you have questions. Call me, email me, whatever you need to. I'm here to help. That is my job, and I will always do that. Okay. Otherwise, keep up the good efforts. We'll talk to you again soon.